The plane shuddered lightly as it lifted off, but the real shock did not come from the engines. It came from a whisper, quiet enough to seem harmless. "I don't feel comfortable with him sitting up front." That sound fell into the luxury cabin like a drop of acid, spreading wide, leaving behind an invisible burn. In that instant, no one laughed, no one spoke, but everyone could feel the air change. The man being targeted. Malik Arden, 45 years old, dressed in a tailored navy suit, his face calm and composed, did not look up. He sat in seat 1A, a seat reserved for those deemed worthy. But with one whisper, that seat had become a witness stand, a place of scrutiny, a stage where prejudice was given power. Malik heard every word, sharp as a needle piercing his chest. He knew this feeling all too well, the feeling of being seen as an outsider. Rage surged inside, but his face showed nothing but icy composure. He had trained himself for decades to keep the fire within and wrap it in a shell of frost. The whisperer was Graham Whitaker, 59, silver hair slicked back, broad frame, moving with the ease of a man who believed every door was built to open for him. Graham never needed to raise his voice to command attention. His arrogance was loud enough on its own. And tonight, he wanted the first seat. Between them, a black CEO who had built a data empire worth tens of billions, and a man living off inherited privilege, an invisible line had been drawn. Ava Lindholm, 35, the lead flight attendant, had heard the whisper. For a fleeting second, her professional smile faltered. In her eyes, there was calculation. Graham was a familiar face, a long-time passenger, always generous with his tips. Malik, despite his wealth, was still a newcomer in the world of Skylink aviation. On one side lay familiar comfort, on the other, the principle of fairness. And Ava knew she was standing at a dangerous crossroads. Malik could sense her hesitation. He didn't need to look up to know Ava was torn between doing what was right and what was easy. His heart beat faster, each thump pulling him back into memories. Being rejected in a Stanford boardroom, the suspicious looks of investors, the mocking laughter on a golf course when he tried to join negotiations uninvited. He knew the phrase, "I don't feel comfortable," too well. The engines hummed steadily, a distant drumbeat. But inside Malik, thoughts collided. Should he fight back now? Should he explode like a firecracker so everyone would see the truth? He inhaled deeply. Discipline prevailed. No, not yet. This stage wasn't big enough. He would let them believe he stepped aside. And then he would bring the entire system to its knees. Malik lifted his eyes and caught Ava's gaze. In that instant, what did she see? Not surrender, not weakness, but an iceberg, silent, unmoving, yet hiding beneath it, a force strong enough to turn oceans upside down. Behind them, Graham smiled faintly, believing that with one whisper he had erased a man's presence. He did not know that the seat he coveted would soon become the symbol of his own downfall. In the dim light of the cabin, an invisible battle had begun. Not with guns, not with shouts, but with silence, restraint, and a hidden resolve. Malik tilted his head, his eyes burning bright in the dark. He whispered to himself, so low that only he could hear. "Play your game. I will end it on a bigger stage, with more eyes watching. And this time, seat 1A will be mine, forever. The sound of Ava Lindholm's heels tapped softly against the thick carpet, steady, but betraying a faint tremor. She walked toward seat 1A, a smile fixed on her lips, like a mask beginning to crack. In her mind, conflicting thoughts collided. Graham Whittaker, a familiar passenger who flew 20 times a year and always left compliments for the crew. And Malik Arden, a mysterious name who had only appeared on Skylink's manifest a few months earlier. One was familiar, the other was power yet to be revealed. And Ava, like so many others in her profession, had grown far too used to choosing the path of least risk. Malik sat upright, eyes on his tablet, but every sound and every breath around him did not escape his awareness. He heard the quickened beat of Ava's heart as she stopped in front of him. "Mr. Arden," Ava began, her voice syrupy sweet, almost too much, as if every word had been dipped in sugar. "I truly apologize. But Miss Whittaker always feels more comfortable sitting in this seat. Would you mind moving to 4A? It's identical, just a bit further back." The suggestion fell into the cabin like a stone into still water, sending cold ripples across the silence. Malik lifted his eyes and looked directly at her. That gaze made Ava feel stripped bare, with nowhere left to hide. He said nothing long enough for the air itself to grow heavy, long enough for Graham, seated just behind, to smirk, flipping through his magazine, his eyes glinting with triumph. At last, Malik spoke, his voice low and steady, each word cutting through the air like a blade. "I requested this seat. I paid for this seat. And I am sitting exactly where I belong." Ava faltered for a second. Behind her, Graham let out a short laugh, deliberately loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Come now, my friend, it's just a seat. Don't make things complicated. Move along. It will be easier for everyone." But the words "my friend" carried no warmth. They dripped with condescension, the tone of a man accustomed to giving orders. Malik tightened his grip on the stylus in his hand, but his expression stayed calm, not a crease of anger touching his face. "My name is Arden. You can call me by that name. And I am not moving." In that instant, Graham's smile froze. Ava felt the air grow heavier still. She realized she was trapped between two forces, a white man with decades of connections and privilege, and a black man radiating a silent authority she could neither name nor deny. In that moment, Ava understood her choice was no longer about keeping a loyal passenger happy. It was a decision that would define her career, and perhaps her life. But instead of choosing what was right, she swallowed hard, turned away, and left behind a suffocating silence. The engines outside continued their steady roar, but to Malik they sounded like drums announcing the start of battle. He knew this fight was far from finished. This was only the prelude, and those who thought they had won would soon taste a reversal they could never have imagined. He leaned back into his seat and closed his eyes, not to rest, but to hide the faint smile playing at his lips, the smile of a man who knew he would be the one writing the final script. The cockpit door opened with a sharp, metallic click. Captain Henry Sloane, 50 or 7, stepped out, tall and lean, shoulders squared, silver hair trimmed neatly beneath his pilot's cap. He did not need to speak, yet his presence alone weighed down the air in the cabin. The lines etched across his face, meant to suggest experience, instead radiated weariness and impatience. Ava exhaled softly when she saw Sloane, as though she had found solid ground at last. Graham Whittaker leaned back in his seat, his smirk deepening, certain that the hand had already been dealt in his favor. Sloane approached, his steel blue eyes scanning Malik with the cool appraisal not of someone resolving a problem, but of a judge delivering a predetermined verdict. "Mr. Arden," his voice low and gravelly from cigarettes and decades of roaring engines, "my crew tells me there's a minor issue with your seat. For the sake of keeping this flight on schedule, I'd like you to move to 4A. We need to depart on time." Malik lifted his head, meeting the captain's gaze. His voice was calm. "I haven't created any issue. I'm sitting in the seat I reserved and paid for. That is the agreement between myself and Skylink." Graham chuckled under his breath, interjecting smoothly. "Captain, clearly all he needs to do is move back. A little flexibility, and everyone's happy, right?" Sloane gave a small nod, his eyes locking onto Malik, cold and unblinking. "You hear that? Everything goes smoother if you cooperate. Don't make this difficult for us, son." The word son fell like a blade. Ava flinched. She understood exactly what it meant. Not familiarity, but belittlement, denial of stature. Graham's laugh grew louder as he lifted his champagne glass, as though to toast an inevitable victory. Malik's pulse quickened, heat flooding his chest. For a moment he was 17 again, stopped by a supermarket guard for looking suspicious, or 26, sitting in a meeting where his idea only mattered once repeated by someone else. But unlike the younger man of those years, the Malik of today had learned to turn humiliation into fuel. He breathed slow and steady, eyes fixed on the captain. "You called me son, but I am not your son. I am a passenger who entered a service agreement, and I expect to be treated with the respect that comes with it." A heavy silence fell, pressing down on the cabin. Sloane's brow furrowed, his voice sharpening. "Stop complicating things. I have the authority to reassign seats for safety and comfort. If you refuse, we can have you removed from this flight." Ava lowered her head, unable to meet Malik's eyes. Graham shook his head with a smirk full of disdain. In their eyes, Malik had been cornered. Malik picked up his tablet, folded it carefully, and rose to his feet. Every motion was deliberate. He walked past Graham without so much as a glance, then stopped at seat 4A. Sitting down, he placed the tablet on the tray and laced his fingers together. His expression was calm, but within him, a plan was already forming, sharp as a blade drawn from its sheath. Graham leaned back in seat 1A, lifting his glass in self. Congratulation, sipping like a man certain of his victory. Ava drew in a long breath, convincing herself that her choice had been the right one. Sloane turned and strode back toward the cockpit, believing he had maintained order. Only Malik knew. They had just written their own sentence. The first-class cabin sat in a silence that felt rehearsed. The steady hum of the engines, the faint clinking of crystal glasses, played like background music for a scene already staged. Graham Whittaker, reclined comfortably in seat 1A, sipping champagne with a smug grin. Ava Lindholm busied herself with folding linens, her hands trembling slightly, eyes darting toward Malik, before quickly looking away. Captain Henry Sloane had already returned to the cockpit, convinced he had restored order. Malik Arden sat in 4A, back straight, eyes fixed on his tablet. But the charts and contracts on the screen blurred into meaningless shapes. In his mind, a storm churned. Not the storm of sudden rage, but a cold, calculating tempest, each wave building into a tide of retribution. They think I've lost. They think I'm just a passenger pushed back a few rows. What they don't know is that this is the moment the balance of power begins to shift. Malik recalled the numbers Daniel Cho, his CFO, had sent weeks ago. A confidential report on Skylink Aviation, mounting debt, over, reliance on aging loyalists, cracks in internal transparency. A company polished on the outside, rotting within. Daniel had asked, "Do you want to move on the takeover now?" Malik had said no. He had wanted to focus on the Swiss robotics deal. But tonight, in this cabin, everything had changed. He opened a secured folder, the blue glow reflecting across his calm face. The acquisition contract for Skylink. With a single signature, with the stroke of a stylus, the entire airline would change hands. Faces flashed through his mind one by one. Graham's smug smirk, dripping with contempt. Ava's calculating glance, choosing safety over justice. Sloane's hollow authority, calling him son as if to press him beneath his heel. Each detail cut deep, carving humiliation into memory, transmuting shame into fuel. Malik did not blink. He memorized every moment, because he would need them later, at the moment of reversal. He quietly typed and sent an encrypted message to Daniel. "Activate Skylink package. Close the deal today. Confirm within 15 minutes. The screen pulsed. Message received. Malik leaned back, drawing a deep breath. Just then, Ava stepped forward, forcing a polite tone. "Mr. Arden, would you like a glass of wine?" Malik lifted his eyes, sharp and cutting, as though seeing straight through her professional mask. He allowed the faintest smile. "Water is enough. I need nothing more." Ava's cheeks flushed. She nodded quickly and retreated, her heart hammering in her chest. She realized his calm was not surrender. It was preparation. Meanwhile, Graham reclined, exhaling with self-satisfaction, pouring another glass of champagne. He believed he had won a small battle. He had no idea that the larger game had already begun, and that he himself was the first pawn marked for sacrifice. Malik closed his eyes, a thought ringing in his mind, hard and unyielding as steel. I didn't lose a seat. I just claimed the entire sky. The blue glow of the tablet reflected across Malik Arden's face. His finger moved slowly, scrolling through each clause of the Skylink Aviation acquisition contract. Every line of text cut like a chisel into the arrogance of Graham Whitaker, into the timid hesitation of Ava Lindholm, and into the cold authority of Captain Henry Sloane. Outside, the Atlantic sky rolled with calm, white clouds. But inside Malik, a storm had already formed. He remembered his father's words, "There are battles you do not fight with fists, only with a signature." And he was right. A message from Daniel Cho flashed across the screen. The documents are ready. All we need is your signature. The $2.8 billion deal will close tonight." Malik inhaled deeply. His chest tightened for a brief moment, as though to fully absorb the weight of this instant. Then he lifted the stylus. One swift, decisive stroke. No hesitation, no tremor. Done. Skylink Aviation, the company that had just forced him out of seat 1A, now belonged to him. Every crew member on this flight, Ava with her smile hiding her choice, Sloane with eyes that carried prejudice, Graham sprawled like a self, proclaimed king, all of them, in that moment, had become employees under his command. Malik closed the tablet and leaned back. A strange calm spread through his body. He was no longer the man humiliated. He had turned that humiliation into a blade sharper than steel. Up front, Graham raised his glass, his voice booming. "Caroline, this champagne is excellent. Taking care of loyal customers like me. Now that's what first-class service should be." He made sure to glance at Malik, eyes full of mockery. Malik allowed himself a faint smile, but said nothing, because he knew that within hours the man basking in triumph would collapse upon his own counterfeit throne. Ava passed by, carrying a tray of water. When her eyes met Malik's, her heart clenched, not out of fear, but because she felt a power radiating from him. His silence did not resemble defeat. It felt like the calm before a storm. From the cockpit, Sloane's voice carried out, tinged with satisfaction. "The passenger is settled now. We're cleared for takeoff." Malik heard every word. Settled? No, this was not settling. This was the beginning of a redefinition. The plane surged down the runway. Malik's heartbeat matched the roar of the engines, no longer fueled by anger, but by the pulse of a man who had just claimed an empire. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "You think you've humiliated me, but you've just signed your own sentence. When we land, everything will change." The Gulf Stream sliced through the night, racing across a sea of silver clouds bathed in moonlight. Inside the cabin, soft lights glowed, the hum of the engine steady, wrapping everything in a veneer of false calm. But in Malik Arden's mind, each passing second was becoming a milestone in a quiet coup. The tablet on his lap vibrated. An encrypted message appeared. "Transaction complete. Ethereum now officially owns Skylink. Press release scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern. Congratulations." Malik's eyes lingered on the words, a subtle gleam flickering in them. Not an outburst of joy, but a quiet, calculated satisfaction. He knew he had just taken the helm of an empire. At the front row, Graham Whitaker reclined comfortably, raising his glass of champagne. His gravelly voice filled the cabin. "Ava, you really know how to treat a loyal client. Every detail perfect. Now that is Skylink class." He laughed loudly, glancing deliberately at Malik, as if to carve the insult deeper. Malik only gave the faintest nod, lips curling into an unreadable smile. To Graham, it was silence. But Ava, standing nearby, sensed something else entirely. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of a man who already knew he had won. She swallowed hard, a shiver of unease running down her spine. In the cockpit, Captain Henry Sloane leaned toward his first officer, Ethan Park, his voice low. "You see, put a guy like that back where he belongs, and everything runs smooth. Passengers like him need discipline, otherwise trouble never ends." Ethan nodded politely, but the image of Malik's eyes before leaving 1A lingered with him, tightening his chest. Malik quietly opened the personnel files Daniel had just sent over. Names appeared one after another, etched like lines of fate. Eva Lindholm, 10 years of service, marked professional, but noted, easily swayed by frequent flyers. Henry Sloane, over 30 years of experience, iron discipline, annotated multiple passenger complaints for authoritarian conduct. Ethan Park, young, talented, but never once challenged wrongdoing. Each line tightened the weight in Malik's chest. They were no longer merely people across from him in the cabin. They were his employees now, and every action tonight would shape the course of their careers. Ava returned, placing a glass of water gently on Malik's table. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "If you need anything else, I'll prepare it right away." Malik looked up. His eyes cut through her, leaving her breathless. His words came slow and deliberate. "No. What I need, you'll see clearly when we land." Ava froze, stunned. The words, vague yet heavy, sounded like prophecy. She turned away quickly, but her chest tightened with confusion and dread. Malik closed the tablet and sat upright, his eyes falling shut. Outside, the night sky stretched in stillness. Inside, however, an invisible storm gathered, waiting for release. Because in just a few hours, when the wheels struck the runway in Geneva, the constellation of power would be rewritten. Dawn broke along the horizon, a pale golden glow spreading across the thick clouds. The Gulf Stream glided smoothly through the still sky. But for Malik Arden, every passing minute was only the ticking countdown to the explosion of news. At exactly 9 a.m. Eastern Time, his tablet vibrated softly. A notification from Daniel Cho lit up the screen. "The release has gone out. Every major outlet is carrying it. Etherion acquires Skylink Aviation. You are the new chairman." Malik lifted his gaze. Inside the cabin, no one yet knew the world outside was in uproar. Graham Whitaker still reclined, sipping his drink, laughter booming as though victory had already been secured. Ava Lindholm moved about in her role of service, but her eyes had dimmed, as if she were bracing for an invisible storm. Then Graham's phone buzzed violently. He picked it up, eyes flicking to the screen. A pause. His smile froze. "What?" His voice cracked loud enough for Ava to turn. He read aloud, as if he could not trust his own eyes. "Etherion Analytics officially acquires Skylink. Malik Arden appointed chairman of the board." The words tore through the false calm of the cabin. The glass in Graham's hand trembled, drops of champagne spilling out. Ava froze in place. Her wide eyes locked on Malik, the man who had sat silently all this time, still as stone. His hands clasped together, head slightly bowed, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. In the cockpit, frantic whispers broke out. Captain Henry Sloane had just received the internal alert. He swallowed hard, sweat breaking across his forehead. Impossible. He's the new owner. First Officer Ethan Park glanced over, his heart racing. He remembered Malik's eyes when Sloane had called him son, calm yet fathomless. Now he understood. It was not the patience of a weak man, but the silence of one holding the blade. Graham snapped his head toward Malik, his voice cracking. You knew this all along." Malik opened his eyes, his gaze molten steel. "I didn't just know. I made the decision." The cabin went dead silent. Ava dropped the tray, her hands shaking. In the cockpit, Sloane gripped the yoke tightly, forcing composure. Ethan turned away, unable to meet Malik's gaze. The air grew thick, as if the oxygen had been drained. Everyone in the cabin now understood. The play they had staged had been overturned in a single night. The man they had forced from seat 1A now held power over the entire airline. Malik leaned back, a faint smile curving his lips. "We are about to land. And when we touch down, every seat, every fate in this cabin will be reassigned, according to the true worth of each person." His words rang like a verdict unspoken, suspended above them all. The cabin felt frozen. The engines still roared steadily, but every gaze was fixed on Malik Arden, the man who only hours ago had been forced out of seat 1A, and who now held the fate of everyone in the cabin in his hands. Graham Whitaker's hand trembled as he set down his glass, his voice desperate. "You can't do this. I've been a loyal customer for 20 years. Skylink needs people like me." Malik turned his head, his eyes cold. "Loyal? No. You've only been loyal to your privilege, and I've just bought the entire system that enabled it. Your game is over, Graham." Graham's face flushed, words caught in his throat. He forced a crooked smile, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Ava Lindholm stood a few steps away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. She drew a deep breath, her voice shaking. "Mr. Arden, I was only following procedure. I never meant to insult you." Malik looked at her for a long moment. In that silence, Ava felt as if every layer of professionalism had been stripped away, leaving her exposed and fragile. "Procedure." Malik's voice cut like a hammer blow, each word deliberate. "And what was your procedure, Ava? Protecting the comfort of the wealthy, regardless of justice. That isn't procedure. That is cowardice." Tears welled in Ava's eyes. She bowed her head, her lips trembling, unable to speak. The cockpit door creaked open. Captain Henry Sloane stepped out, his face pale, though he tried to keep his voice firm. "Mr. Arden, no matter what has happened, in the air I am still the captain. I hold absolute authority over the safety of this flight." Malik rose to his feet. In that instant, the space seemed to contract. He walked forward, slow and deliberate, stopping directly before Sloane. Their eyes locked. "Captain," Malik said, his voice low but resonant, "your authority ends at the cockpit door. The future of this airline and of your career lies in my hands. You used your power to enforce prejudice, to diminish me. That is not safety. That is abuse." Sloane parted his lips to argue, but Malik's steel gaze silenced him. Behind him, First Officer Ethan Park lingered in the doorway, his eyes avoiding Malik's. Malik turned toward him, his tone sharp as a blade, And your silence tonight is complicity. In the face of injustice, you chose to stay seated. You thought that kept your career safe, but in truth, it buried it. Ethan lowered his head, fists clenched, a bead of sweat falling onto the carpet. He knew there was no defense that could save him now. The cabin had become a courtroom, and Malik, calm and deliberate, delivered judgment to each one. No shouting, no threats. The truth in his words alone had turned the space into a chamber of justice. He stepped back, his gaze sweeping across them all. When we land, every seat, every title, every uniform in this cabin will be recalculated. Not by familiarity, not by privilege, but by true worth. A suffocating silence blanketed the air. Graham sat pale and shaken. Ava's eyes brimmed with tears. Sloane clenched his jaw. Ethan bowed his head, silent in the weight of his guilt. Malik returned to seat 4A and sat down slowly. His eyes turned toward the window, where the Swiss dawn blazed across the sky. A new era had begun, and it had risen from this very cabin. The Swiss sky opened wide, Lake Geneva shimmering silver under the morning sun. The Gulf Stream tilted its wings, descending steadily. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. No forced laughter, no cutting remarks, only the steady roar of the engines, and an atmosphere heavy as stone. Malik Arden sat upright in seat 4A, his gaze calm yet burning like a fire concealed beneath ice. He was no longer the passenger put in his place. He was the judge. The landing gear struck the runway. The aircraft shuddered. One chapter ended, another began. As the plane slowed, Malik rose and stepped into the narrow aisle. Each step resounded like the beat of a drum delivering judgment. He stopped in the center of the cabin, his voice low and steady, yet cutting through the air. We have crossed a long night together, and in that night, each of you revealed your true worth. His eyes fell on Ava Lindholm. She stood rigid, her hands clasped, her eyes red. Ava, Malik said, not loudly but with chilling clarity. You chose convenience over justice. You sold the dignity of a passenger to preserve your own ease. Your career ends here. Ava gasped, tears spilling, but she did not argue. She knew in Malik's eyes that any excuse was meaningless. He turned toward Captain Henry Sloane, frozen near the cockpit door, his aging face twitching with anger. Captain Sloane, you wore the mantle of authority, yet used it to coerce and humiliate. You believed the skies belonged to you. But from this day on, you no longer have the right to fly under my banner. Sloane clenched his jaw, lips trembling as if to retort, but silence overtook him. Malik's gaze allowed no rebuttal. Then his eyes shifted to Ethan Park, the young first officer. Ethan bowed his head, unable to look up. Ethan, Malik said more softly, but every word cut deep. You thought silence would keep you safe. But silence in the face of injustice is complicity. You chose the worst path, and now you too will leave that seat. Ethan swallowed hard, his face flushing with shame. Finally, Malik stood before Graham Whitaker, still seated in 1A, clutching his phone with trembling hands. The smug smile that had once lingered there was gone, replaced by panic. Graham, Malik said, his voice cold. You believed privilege could buy everything. You whispered a single phrase, thinking it would erase my presence. But what you have lost is not just a seat. It is the false power you deluded yourself with. Your victory was an illusion, and now the illusion has shattered. Graham's mouth opened, but no words emerged. He lowered his head, like a man receiving his death sentence. Malik stepped back, standing tall in the center of the cabin. His voice dropped even lower, yet carried louder than the engines themselves. You thought this was only a flight. No, this was a test, and you have failed. The cabin door opened, icy Geneva air rushing in. Malik gestured. Leave this plane, now. You no longer have a place in the skies I command. Ava broke into sobs. Sloane's face darkened purple with rage. Ethan bowed in silent defeat. Graham rose heavily, every step dragging the wreckage of his arrogance. And then the cabin was left with only Malik Arden. He closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath, letting the cold wind wash over him. He did not feel triumph, only the stillness of justice restored. From that moment on, the skies no longer belonged to privilege. They belonged to truth. Morning light streamed through the vast glass panels of the private terminal in Geneva. Passengers usually disembarked with smiles, but today, 4 figures descended from the Gulf Stream with darkened faces. Ivor Lindholm with tear-stained eyes, Henry Sloane grinding his teeth in anger, Ethan Park with his head bowed, and Graham Whittaker stumbling like a man who had lost his soul. They were not just leaving the plane, they were leaving behind their very futures. At the bottom of the stairs, a fleet of black cars waited. Security staff in tailored suits stepped forward, their tone polite yet firm. Please, you will be escorted to the hotel. The termination process and related procedures will be communicated to you later today. The words fell with the weight of a sentence. Graham opened his mouth to protest, but Malik's gaze from atop the stairs silenced him instantly. Ava choked back a sob, her trembling legs barely carrying her forward. Malik Arden stood alone at the aircraft door, the cold wind sweeping through, carrying away the lingering scent of champagne. For a fleeting moment, he saw flashes of his own past. The boy of color driven out of a grocery store, the young man sidelined in a boardroom, the passenger once pushed back from seat 1A. All those stings converged into a single force. Rebirth. He descended the stairs, head held high. In the distance, 2 international financial reporters, alerted by breaking news, had already arrived, their cameras flashing furiously. On their phone screens, the headline blazed, "Etherian officially launches Astral Jet, an airline with zero tolerance for discrimination." Malik stopped before the reporters, his smile calm, his voice resonant. I did not just acquire Skylink. I ended it. From today, our new name is Astral Jet. We will build an airline where seats are not measured by skin color, social status, or connections. They are measured by a single principle: human dignity. Cameras thundered like rolling storms. Everyone nearby, from reporters to airport staff, fell silent, listening. In that moment, Malik was no longer just a CEO. He was a symbol of transformation. He continued, Astral Jet will establish the Astra Academy to train not only the skills of aviation, but also the discipline of respect. 10% of annual profits will go to the Astra Foundation, opening doors for those who have been turned away. We will not just carry people into the sky. We will return faith to the skies themselves. Applause erupted. Even some airport staff could not hold back their emotions. Malik turned to look at the aircraft standing tall on the runway, its silver body gleaming under the morning sun. It had once been a symbol of exclusion. Today, it marked the beginning of a new era. He drew a deep breath, a faint smile touching his lips. From the seat 1A that was taken from him, he had built an entire sky of justice. And now, that sky bore a new name: Astral Jet. That flight ended on the runway in Geneva, but its echoes carried far beyond the clouds. A single whispered prejudice, seemingly harmless, exposed the rot within an entire system, and one man, thought to be just a passenger pushed aside, turned a moment of humiliation into the beginning of a reform. Malik Arden did not seek justice in anger. He found it in composure, in decisive choice, in the strength of waiting for the right moment. He did not just reclaim seat 1A. He transformed an entire airline into a symbol of dignity. This story reminds us, true power does not lie in shouting or privilege, but in the resolve to defend what is right. A single wrongful whisper can destroy trust, but one courageous decision can rewrite the sky. If you believe that dignity cannot be bought and justice cannot remain silent, hit like on this video. Subscribe so you never miss the next story, where truth will always find its voice. And before you leave, drop a comment with just 2 words, right seat, to remind each other that the place you deserve to sit, no one has the right to take away.